Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. Deeper analysis of a budget that was labelled as having very few surprises has in fact thrown up a few. We speak to Engineering News editor Terence Creamer about some of these. Terence, welcome to Second Take. One of the first issues is that Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan ignored the unions and held a steady line on monetary policy. Did this come as a surprise?
Yes, I think it did to a certain extent. As you said, the analysis is this was a business as usual type budget. Not many surprises thrown up. But I think there was a window of opportunity here for the minister. Here are left-wing allies of the government that are wanting some sort of signal that there's a softening or a movement to the left. And he didn't do that at all. In fact, if anything, he held a very orthodox line at a time when he had an opportunity to move some things around. We definitely aren't going to easily stay within the inflation target band of 3 to 6% over the next few years. The Eskom price increases, which will be announced next week, are going to make that very, very difficult. So he could have sort of moderated or widened the band from, some people were saying, from 3% to 8% or 7%, just to give some room for maneuver, as well as, provide something of a signal to the left that he's listening to them. Instead, he held very tightly to the line. And also the window of opportunity to do this is going to close, because I think there's been a lot of aggressive monetary policy action taken in the rest of the world to deal with the Great Recession, as people are calling it. And already you're seeing that starting to tighten now. This morning we saw the US starting to raise rates again. So I think he had this year to maybe make some changes and decided not to. So I think that was a little bit of a surprise, and now we'll see that he's become the new enemy number one of the left, and there's strike action and discussion of protest against the minister. So the shift from maybe Trevor Manuel being the enemy to now Pravin Gordhan being the enemy, has been made.
We also saw a shift in policy regarding public enterprises, most notably the Pebblebed modular reactor. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, I think there were a couple of things in the public enterprises vote that were a little bit surprising. Look, we all knew the Pebblebed modular reactor was under major financial stress and was cash strapped, and that government had to make big decisions around this time. And, we've invested over the last few years, for 5 years or so, up to, over 10 billion rand in this project. Okay, directly off budget, say 8 billion rand. So we've put a lot of money into this and a lot more over the decades. So we're entering a phase where critical decisions were having to be made about the Pebblebed modular reactor. They had changed the strategy from punting this as an energy generation technology to really an industrial process, heat stroke energy generation technology. They are gaining some traction around the world in terms of interest. There's the US interest, there's interest out of Algeria, there's interest out of Japan. And so it was an interesting period for this project. So the decision to pull back entirely from giving it sort of 1.2 billion rand a year to now sort of 3 million rand, which isn't even enough, as people say, to pay the chief executive salary, is a major pullback and a major policy decision. There's also, it comes at a time when, we're talking about upscaling our nuclear skills, upscaling our nuclear industry. So from a policy side, the fact that we could lose these 800 or so jobs in the Pebblebed modular reactor that are nuclear skills, it's quite interesting and intriguing. And from a business perspective, a pure business perspective, it's odd, because you've got to a point where you wanted to start harvesting all this investment. And instead of maybe putting this up for a privatization, we've actually created the conditions for a fire sale. And then there are a few other things in the public enterprises side. I mean, the fact that Transnet is getting 7.5 cents a litre from April 7th in every litre that we put into our petrol tanks and our diesel tanks is a signal that Transnet's no longer fully self-funding as it was supposed to be. So that's quite a big policy shift. It's about security of supply for the fuel pipeline. But what I found a little bit interesting is that Treasury has made it very clear that it's capped at 4.5 billion rand. And even if a private sector operator were to offer some sort of security of supply for fuel through their fuel pipeline, they can't access the fuel levy. So I'm wondering whether that's an anti-competitive move.
Then let's turn to industrial policy. It was a centrepiece of the budget, but were there any surprises in this regard?
Well, I think the biggest surprise is the lack of alignment with what happened elsewhere. I mean, the fact that nuclear is mentioned in the industrial policy as one of the areas that we want to build up, and then you cut the PBMR. So that's an interesting anomaly that emerged. That's a surprise. I think the other thing is that we have been fairly parsimonious in the way that we've upscaled the amount available for incentives. Only really two sectors have benefited from this upscaling. So it's the automotive sector, which basically relies on the support, otherwise it will probably shift elsewhere, and the textile sector, which is really about saving jobs. And the other sort of anomaly here, especially on the automotive side, is that on the one hand, you're giving 750 million rand a year up to R1 billion by 2013. On the other hand, you want a carbon emission tax coming in for environmental purposes that could actually hit sales quite dramatically and take away billions from the automotive industry. So where is this? We're supposed to be in an era under the Zuma administration of policy alignment, much more focus on planning, much more coordination. I'm not seeing it in the industrial policy versus what's happening in the other departments. And also, if we're going to be putting industrial policy as a centerpiece, don't you think we should back it up with the numbers? There are a number of sectors, okay, they're cross-cutting incentive programs and all sorts of things that are there that have been slightly upscaled. But don't you think we have to back it up with the resources, the numbers? And I didn't see that.
Terence, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. That is the Second Take show for this week. Join us again next week for more news analysis.